When I was a little girl of just 4 years old, something traumatic happened to me that has plagued me to this day. I was a sheltered child, and my mom may have been just a bit overprotective, but even she couldn't watch me every moment. She had to work, so during the day I would go to my friend Hannah's house and her mom would watch us. Now don't get me wrong, her mom was a responsible sitter, but it was 1990, and so us playing in their backyard, which had a huge privacy fence, seemed safe enough. Her mom would peer out the kitchen window from time to time, which was adjacent to the backyard, and check on us. Hannah and I would have the best time for hours on end just playing Tea Party, Barbie dolls, and whatever else our young minds could dream up. Something special about her house, I remember, is that they had a pet goat. Even though the yard was fenced in, they kept it tied to the clothesline, I guess to ensure our safety and just in case it tried to escape the fence. There was plenty of slack in the rope for the goat to run around comfortably, although it would oftentimes get wrapped around this stone lounge chair. As a child, at first I found the goat to be scary because I was afraid it would bite me, but Hannah quickly showed me just how sweet this animal was. We would hand feed it, and I have this vivid memory of laughing as the goat's tongue tickled my tiny palm as it lapped away at the food. In fact, that whole day is vivid in my memory, even after all these years. However, not for any positive reasons. One fateful afternoon, Hannah and I were playing with the new lights and lace Barbie when her older brother Chris came outside with his friend David. The two of them were well into their late teens, tall and lanky. I always found Chris to be a menace because he would always tease Hannah or do something that would end up making his little sisters shout for their mother. Needless to say, he didn't have that loving, protective, big brother thing going on that most families seem to have. But she and I just dealt with it or ignored them. After they came outside, I absentmindedly saw them walking over to the goat, which in my innocent mind I figured they were going to pet it. However, my gaze landed solely on them as I watched David pick up a fallen stick from a tree and begin poking the goat. I assumed that Chris would immediately put an end to such action since it was his family's pet, but to my horror, he began to laugh as if to applaud his friend's heinous action. The two of them took turns taunting the poor goat, swatting its legs with the stick over and over as maniacal laughs spilled from their mouths. All I could do was watch in silent terror beside Hannah, who was just as frozen in place as I was. The entire time, the poor goat would cry out in pain and try to get away from them. At one point, Hannah snapped out of her fears long enough to run at her brother, screaming and demanding that he stop. She smacked at his legs, but in turn, he pushed her 4-year-old body down effortlessly. Concern for my best friend kicked in, and I ran over to see if she was okay while shouting, "Don't push her or I'll tell!" Chris's eyebrow raised in slight surprise at my sudden attempt at bravery. He then let out a chuckle and said, "You're not going to do shit." I remember gasping because he said a bad word, but quickly forgot about that when he grabbed my hand and placed the stick in it as he firmly stated, "No one likes a tattletale." At this point, the goat had wrapped itself around the stone lounge chair so tightly to the point it couldn't move much. I suddenly felt my back being shoved at by David, who was nudging me towards the goat, the stick still in my hand. My mind hadn't processed what was about to happen fast enough before Chris demanded that I hit the goat. My mouth fell open and I shouted, "No!" Chris wasn't having any of that. He rushed towards me, his tall frame towering over me. He shot me the most frightening, hateful look as he sternly threatened, "You'll hit that goat, or I'll hit you." Terror gripped my entire being at his words. In my mind, his threat was real. He and David could easily do some damage to my small body, so I felt like I had no choice. Once again, David roughly nudged me forward to emphasize they meant business. With stick in hand and tears beginning to flow down my rosy cheeks, I reared back, then brought it down, hitting the goat in the side. It barely made a sound, as I'm sure I didn't hit it very hard. Chris let out a huff of frustration as he shouted, "Harder!" During all of this, I could hear Hannah behind me crying and begging her brother to stop. At one point, David subdued her so that she couldn't go tell their mom. The next few seconds felt like a lifetime as I took a few more whacks at the goat. Each time it cried out more and thrashed around in pain. Looking back, I don't think my hits hurt it as much as theirs did, I'm sure, but in my fragile mind at the time, I thought I was half killing the poor thing. Bottom line, I was smart enough to know that I was causing an innocent animal to suffer, and against my will. Finally, Hannah's mom came running out the back door screaming at the two boys. They dropped their hold on us and ran out the back gate. I fell to my knees and was crying so hard that the tears clouded my vision. I gripped the grass between my fingers and kept muttering through sobs that I was sorry. After pulling Hannah and I into a hug and consoling us enough to where we were no longer choking on tears, she helped us to our feet. She removed the rope from the goat's neck to free him and began inspecting the possible damages. Despite me beating the defenseless thing, it allowed us to pet it, as Hannah's mom assured us he was going to be fine. The rest of the day was a blur. I do know my mom took me to McDonald's for a bit and I played in the play place. I guess she did that to get my mind off of what happened. I do know that after that, I wasn't allowed at Hannah's house anymore. She still came to play at my house from time to time, but eventually that came to an end after a while. To this day, I always hold a lot of bitterness still in my heart because that day, those two boys not only ruined a big part of my childhood innocence, they drove a wedge into my friendship with my first best friend. Not to mention, harming an animal and causing me to be traumatized by witnessing any type of animal suffering for the rest of my life. So, Chris and David, you two animal-abusing psychos, let's not meet again.